Karen Adams was last seen on March 11, 2007, when she left her home in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and drove to the Mountaineer Gaming Resort in Chester, West Virginia. At the casino, she used her credit card, and security cameras later showed her leaving the parking lot at 4:31 a.m. Her cellular phone voicemail was accessed at 4:35 a.m. that morning, after which she vanished without a trace. She never returned home and has not been heard from since. Adams's red or maroon two-door 2005 Suzuki Forenza, with Pennsylvania license plate number EDT 5587, remains missing, and neither her cellular phone nor credit cards have been used since that night. Adams's family members, who know her well, do not believe she would have left without informing anyone, especially since she had a dog she deeply cherished. Her brother, who lived with her, disclosed that Adams had a gambling problem, and despite his repeated pleas for her to stop spending money at the casino, she continued to gamble, seeing it as her favorite pastime. Adams worked 2 jobs at the time of her disappearance. One as a cashier at a retail store, and the other as a teacher's aide for disabled individuals at the Allegheny Valley School. Her case remains unsolved, and Pennsylvania police are continuing to investigate her disappearance. Alia Lunsford, a shy and quiet 3-year-old, was last seen alive at her Weston, West Virginia home on the morning of September 24, 2011. She had been feeling unwell with flu-like symptoms the night before, but her mother, Lena Marie Lunsford, claimed she was asleep in bed when checked at 6:30 a.m. However, by 9:00 a.m., Alia had vanished without a trace. Despite realizing her daughter was missing, Lena waited until 11:30 a.m. to report her disappearance. She claimed she had spent the intervening hours driving around looking for Alia, running out of gas at one point. The initial investigation found no signs of forced entry or abduction, and extensive searches of the area, including a nearby river, failed to locate Alia. Her family insisted she wouldn't have wandered off alone, which raised immediate suspicions. Alia's disappearance soon became one of West Virginia's most disturbing missing person cases. 9 days after Alia vanished, authorities removed her 4 siblings from the home and placed them in foster care. The removal wasn't explained publicly, but the family had a history with child services. All of Lena's children, including Alia, had previously been in foster care or placed with relatives, and Lena herself was pregnant with twin girls at the time. After the twins were born, they too were taken from her. In the month following Alia's disappearance, Lena was arrested on unrelated federal charges of welfare fraud. Her and her husband, Ralph Keith Lunsford, who was Alia's stepfather, both had criminal records involving minor offenses. Alia's case grew colder as time passed, with Lena and Ralph vaguely blaming each other for the child's disappearance. The courts eventually found that all 6 of the Lunsford children had been neglected and suffered from severe dental decay. In 2013, while Lena was in jail, she and Ralph lost their parental rights to the remaining children. Over the years, suspicion continued to mount around Lena's potential involvement. Despite maintaining her innocence, Lena spent much of the time after Alia's disappearance in and out of jail for probation violations tied to her welfare fraud case. Then, in November 2016, more than 5 years after Alia was last seen, a major breakthrough occurred. Lena was arrested at her new home in St. Petersburg, Florida, and charged with homicide by child abuse in connection to Alia's disappearance. During Lena's trial in 2018, devastating testimony came from Alia's 2 older sisters, who were 9 and 11 at the time of their sister's disappearance. The girls, who had since been adopted, revealed disturbing details about the night Alia died. They stated Lena had always been harsher with Alia compared to her other children. On September 23, 2011, Lena hit Alia in the head with a wooden bed slat after the little girl soiled herself. The impact left Alia's head swollen and squishy. When the sisters found her unresponsive in bed 12 hours later, Lena attempted to revive her, but didn't call for help. Instead of seeking medical attention, Lena placed Alia's lifeless body in a laundry hamper, loaded it into the family car, and drove with her children and infant son to a rural wooded area known as Vadis. The elder sister described how she accompanied Lena, who carried the hamper deep into the woods while her younger sister stayed behind in the car with the baby. At one point, Lena told the older girl to stop and sit down while she continued on with the hamper. She returned alone. Once back at home, Lena threatened her daughters, warning them to keep quiet. "I brought you into this world, and I can take you out," she reportedly said. The girls kept their dark secret for 5 years. Lena's defense team attempted to discredit the sisters' testimony, accusing them of lying. They proposed alternate theories, including that Alia might have been sold for heroin or died accidentally from an overdose of flu medicine. A restaurant manager from Louisiana testified that she thought she saw Alia with a man at her restaurant in 2017, but this sighting was never confirmed. Despite these defense efforts, the jury found Lena guilty on all counts in April 2018. She was convicted of murder of a child by refusal or failure to provide necessities, child abuse resulting in injury, and concealment of a deceased human body. Lena was sentenced to life in prison without parole, with an additional 40 years for the other charges. Alia's body has never been found. Investigators believe she was buried in a shallow grave in a ravine that frequently floods, which may have washed away any remaining evidence. Despite exhaustive searches of the Vadis area, no trace of the child has ever been recovered. Maisie Sigmund Palmer was last seen in Charleston, West Virginia on July 14, 1979, after spending the evening with 18-year-old John Eric J. Farley. At the time, Maisie had been divorced for 3 months and was living with her parents in the 1600 block of Grapevine Road in Sissonville. That night, she and Farley went on a date, having met up at the Roaring Twenties nightclub on Hale Street. The couple then left the club together and hitched a ride to the King's Inn nightclub, located on 2nd Avenue in Charleston. Before getting out of the vehicle at the King's Inn, Maisie reportedly said, "Oh, he's in there," referring to someone inside, though the driver did not know who she meant. Maisie did not specify further. Once inside the King's Inn, Maisie and Farley took a table on the ground floor with a friend, but Maisie later mentioned she was going upstairs to talk to someone. A few minutes after she went upstairs, Farley followed her, but neither of them was seen alive again. The next day, when Maisie did not return home, her family was not immediately alarmed, as it was not uncommon for her to spend the night away from home. However, when Farley also failed to come home, his family became concerned, as this was unusual behavior for him. Both families eventually reported their children missing, though initially, authorities did not see any connection between their disappearances. It wasn't until January 1980, 6 months later, that investigators realized there might be a link. Initially, they considered the possibility that the couple had run away together, but the fact that they left behind all their belongings, including clothes, money, and jewelry, as well as the fact that Farley didn't have a car and was not a licensed driver, led authorities to rethink this theory. Nearly 5 years later, in May 1984, Farley's skeletal remains were found in Fayette County, West Virginia, about 30 miles from Charleston. The remains were located near Cannleton Hollow Road at the Fayette County Surface Mine, a location that would have taken about 45 minutes to drive from Charleston. Farley's clothes from the night of his disappearance were found alongside the remains. His hands were taped behind his back, and he had been shot to death. A single bullet was found near his remains, indicating he was likely killed around the time of his disappearance. Despite this discovery, there was no sign of Maisie Sigmund Palmer at the scene. Farley had graduated from high school in the spring of 1979 and was described by his loved ones as a normal teenager with no particular problems. He had applied for jobs locally and was considering joining the military, but his future was tragically cut short. Maisie, on the other hand, was known to be friendly and outgoing. She had a trusting, somewhat naive nature, according to her friends, and had worked in nursing homes and as a secretary and file clerk. She had lived in various places before settling in West Virginia, including Oklahoma City, Seaside Park, New Jersey, and several small cities in Pennsylvania. Although Maisie had no criminal record, investigators learned that she had associated with people involved in motorcycle gangs and drugs, which could have played a role in her disappearance. Mark Legg, a former West Virginia resident, is considered a person of interest in both Farley's murder and Maisie's disappearance. Legg has been linked to several unrelated crimes in both West Virginia and North Carolina between 1983 and 2000, including sexual offenses and the murders of 2 young men. However, despite his numerous connections to criminal activity, authorities have not been able to directly tie him to the cases of Farley and Sigmund Palmer, and no charges have ever been filed against him. In the years following their disappearances, many members of the families involved, including Farley's father and Maisie's parents, have passed away. Foul play is strongly suspected in Maisie's disappearance, though the case remains unsolved to this day. Luke Stout was last seen at his residence on Hickory Flat Road outside of Buckhannon, West Virginia, on July 18, 2012, between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock p.m. Before leaving, he told his mother and brother that he loved them and would be back later that day. The last known sighting of Stout was when he was walking down the driveway, carrying a green bicycle frame. He had made plans to meet a friend, get a ride, and repair the bicycle, with the intention of giving it to his friend. Afterward, his friend was supposed to help Stout fix his own bicycle, which had damaged handlebars and had been left in Buckhannon. Stout never returned, and he has never been heard from again. A few days after his disappearance, Stout's brothers discovered his bicycle leaning against a trailer behind a pharmacy in Buckhannon. It had not been repaired, which added to the mystery of his disappearance. Before he vanished, Stout had told people that a man named Rodolfo Villagomez Chino Correa had threatened him and even held a gun to his forehead. Stout attempted to file a report about the threat with the police, but he was reportedly turned away, which left him with little recourse for the danger he felt. The disappearance of Stout is particularly eerie because Correa, the man Stout had named as a potential threat, had a criminal background that would later link him to another crime. In 2015, Correa pleaded guilty to the January 2012 disappearance and murder of Joshua Oberg. Oberg's body was found on July 23, 2012, just 5 days after Stout's own disappearance. Correa had orchestrated the murder of Oberg due to an affair Oberg was having with Correa's wife, even going so far as to hire 2 of his wife's cousins to help carry out the crime. Correa was sentenced to 40 years in prison for his involvement in the murder. While it remains unverified, there were rumors that Stout may have had a relationship with Correa's wife prior to his disappearance, which could have contributed to his fear of Correa. However, no direct evidence has connected Correa to Stout's case, and Correa has not been linked to Stout's disappearance in any official capacity. Stout's disappearance remains especially perplexing because of his deep ties to his family. He was living with and caring for his mother, who was terminally ill at the time. Stout had a strong sense of responsibility and was very devoted to his family, making it completely out of character for him to leave without warning or explanation. Additionally, Stout was not just a family man, but also a skilled carpenter, having practiced the trade for several years, and he was known to be a talented artist. His abilities and dedication to his work only underscore the tragedy of his disappearance, which remains unsolved. Authorities suspect foul play, and Luke Stout's case continues to be open, though no significant leads have emerged. Stina Woods was last seen at her residence in Charleston, West Virginia, on March 10, 2016. She and her husband, Arthur Owen Woods, had recently moved from Mount Lookout, West Virginia, to a new home on Lance Drive in Charleston. On the day she vanished, Stina and Owen had a heated domestic dispute that escalated into a violent confrontation, according to Owen's admission. After that, she was never heard from again. Owen's behavior after Stina's disappearance raised serious concerns. He used her debit card multiple times, withdrew money from her accounts, and even sold her car. Shockingly, Owen did not report his wife missing. Instead, he told a neighbor that Stina had moved to Oklahoma and later claimed to police that she had stolen $29,000 from his bank account before running away to Ecuador with her ex-husband. Before her disappearance, Stina had communicated with a male friend on Facebook, telling him that her relationship with Owen was abusive. In those conversations, She speculated about withdrawing money from Owen's accounts and expressed a desire to go to Ecuador with him. However, there were inconsistencies in her story. She had never previously traveled internationally, and she didn't have a passport at the time. The man she was speaking to was later interviewed by police, and he confirmed that he had never met Starina in person. He also stated that Starina had stopped contacting him in March, and there was no record of any withdrawal of $29,000 from Owen's accounts. Starina's cell phone was never used after March 11, 2016. However, her debit card continued to be used to make purchases and pay bills. One of these purchases was for minutes on a prepaid phone, which was bought on Owen's work computer. Furthermore, Owen was photographed using Starina's debit card to withdraw money from an ATM. He continued to make purchases using her card until May 2016, at which point the bank froze the account after it had gone into a significant negative balance. It wasn't until May 19, 2016, that Starina's family reported her missing, over 2 months after she had last been seen. Investigators later discovered a significant amount of blood at the couple's home, some of which was visible to the naked eye, but much of it had been cleaned up. Bloodstains were found on the front door, stairs, and in the living room, indicating that a violent event had occurred in the home. In 2018, Owen was arrested for fraud in connection with the unauthorized use of Starina's debit card. However, the charge was eventually dismissed. In May 2019, Owen was charged with Starina's murder. In November 2020, he reached a plea agreement with the prosecution, pleading no contest to voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for his involvement in Starina's death, though her body was never found. Starina left behind 2 children, both of whom were living in Virginia at the time of her disappearance. Despite Owen's conviction, her body has never been recovered, and foul play is strongly suspected due to the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the evidence found in the home. Angela Cherise Stevens, known as Cherise, was last seen on October 1, 1993, in Beckley, West Virginia. On that day, she dropped her husband, Norman Stevens, off at his place of employment, located in the 200 block of George Street in the Industrial Park area of Beckley. Cherise was driving a white Dodge Daytona at the time, and a photo of the vehicle is available with her case summary. After dropping her husband off, Cherise was never heard from again. Several factors surrounding her disappearance raise suspicions of foul play. Cherise's driver's license expired in 1996, 3 years after she went missing, and her husband, Norman, refused to take a lie detector test. Additionally, just a month after her disappearance, Norman filed for divorce, a move that raised further questions. A private investigator hired by Cherise's father has since uncovered troubling details. Norman did not work the day Cherise was last seen, and the Dodge Daytona Cherise had been driving was allegedly sold after her disappearance. Despite these findings, Norman has not been named as a suspect and insists that Cherise simply left him voluntarily. Cherise's disappearance is considered highly unusual, as it was out of character for her to leave without informing anyone, especially given her family connections. Given the circumstances, authorities suspect foul play, though the case remains unsolved. In 2014, Cherise was declared legally dead, but her loved ones continue to search for answers, hoping to uncover the truth behind her mysterious disappearance. Bobby Adams was last seen in Charleston, West Virginia, on November 30, 1991. At the time of his disappearance, he worked as a cab driver for Chandai Cab. Adams began his shift that day at 4 p.m., with plans to return the taxi to the company at 3 a.m. the following day. Although it wasn't unusual for him to return the car a bit later than scheduled, he never returned the vehicle, and he was never heard from again. The last radio communication Chandai Cab received from Adams was at 11:45 p.m. that night. He was last seen on Washington Street East at around 3:45 a.m. on December 1st, accompanied by an unidentified Caucasian man in his 40s, who had blonde or light brown hair. The man was described as being about 6 feet tall and wearing a brown jacket, but despite efforts to identify him, he has never been linked to the case. The next day, Adams's cab was discovered at dusk near Twilight Drive, about 70 feet off the road. The car was partially concealed by branches, and it had numerous scratches and a broken front light. Inside the trunk were Christmas presents that Adams had purchased for his family. On the back seat of the passenger side, there was a pool of blood, and authorities determined that there was enough blood to presume that a violent death had occurred. Adams's disappearance was immediately considered suspicious, and foul play was suspected. Grace Smith was last seen on February 23, 2022, in Mason County, West Virginia, when she left her mother's residence at 8:30 p.m. to drive to an unknown location. Before leaving, Grace's mother gave her $20 to pay for gas. That day, Grace had spoken separately to her sister and father, expressing feelings of fear and insecurity about the people she was currently associating with. She mentioned that she planned to check into a rehabilitation program to address her ongoing drug problems. Later that night, around 11:30 p.m., Grace's mother tried calling her cellular phone, but there was no answer. Grace was supposed to meet her family the following day to go to rehab, but she never showed up, and she was not heard from again. 2 days later, on February 25th, Grace's car was found abandoned in the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, approximately 10 miles from her mother's home. Her car keys were found on the hood, and most of her personal belongings, including clothes, were left behind inside the vehicle. Authorities confirmed that there had been no calls made from her phone after she had left her mother's house. At the time of her disappearance, Grace was homeless and living out of her car. She had a young daughter from her marriage to her ex-husband, with whom she had divorced in 2021, and a teenage son from a prior relationship. Despite her struggles, Grace was planning to enter rehab and make a fresh start. Foul play is suspected in Grace Smith's case, and authorities are investigating it as a possible homicide. Michael Dillard was last seen on January 12, 2018, when he was helping his mother carry in firewood at their home in the area of Little Beaver and Tioga Road in Calvin, West Virginia, at approximately 4:30 p.m. After assisting his mother, Michael ran behind the house and has never been heard from again. At the time, he was carrying only $2 and left his cellular phone behind. 2 days before his disappearance, on January 10th, Michael told his sister that he was having the best day of his life. On January 11th, he was still in a good mood, but by the time he returned home from school on January 12th, he seemed noticeably depressed. After a brief visit to his sister's house, Michael barely spoke to her. When he and his mother returned to their home, he suddenly ran away without saying a word and never came back. His mother immediately called his father, and by 5 p.m., they had called 911 to report him missing. The weather conditions that evening were severe, with overnight temperatures dropping to 22 degrees below zero, accompanied by rain and fog. Michael's family searched for him all night, but despite subsequent police efforts, no trace of him was found. Search teams using helicopters, dive teams, bloodhounds, and other search crews were unable to uncover any clues. The only item located was Michael's jacket, found about 300 yards from the house roughly a week and a half later. Some agencies have classified Michael as a runaway and suggested he may be in North Carolina or still within the local area. However, the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain unclear, and his case remains unsolved. Samantha Burns was last heard from on November 11, 2002, when she made a call to her mother at 9:45 p.m. from Huntington, West Virginia. She told her mother she had been visiting friends at Marshall University Courtyard Apartments and was on her way home to East Hamlin, where she lived. Burns never arrived home, and her phone, which was turned off shortly after the call, was never used again. This was out of character for her, as she typically kept in contact. The following morning, on November 12th, her burgundy 1999 Chevrolet Cavalier, bearing a tiger sticker on the back window and license plate number 5 by 9326, was found abandoned and set on fire in a secluded area in Wayne County, West Virginia, near the Cabell-Wayne County line. The vehicle was still burning when discovered, and there was no sign of Burns nearby. As the investigation unfolded, two suspects, Chadwick E. Folks and Brandon L. Basham, were identified. The men had escaped from the Hopkins County Jail on November 4, 2002, just a week before Burns's disappearance, and went on a multi-state crime spree that involved robberies, car thefts, and at least one burglary. They were eventually recaptured after Burns went missing. In a shocking twist, Basham confessed to the abduction and murder of Alice Donovan, a woman who disappeared in Conway, South Carolina, on November 14, 2002, just days after Burns. He claimed that Folks was the one who raped, stabbed, and strangled Donovan, though he admitted to helping kidnap her. Both men were convicted of carjacking resulting in death and kidnapping resulting in death for Donovan's case, and were sentenced to death. In June 2003, Folks and Basham were also charged in Burns's case, specifically with carjacking resulting in death. While Burns's body has never been found, prosecutors believe they have enough circumstantial evidence to convict the men. Authorities suggested that the men abducted Burns, held her at gunpoint, and drove her car around, attempting to withdraw money from various ATMs. In July 2005, Basham pleaded guilty to murdering Burns, admitting his involvement in the crime and apologizing to her family. He was sentenced to life in prison. The legal outcome for Folks remains undetermined. Both Folks and Basham are currently on death row in South Carolina. Burns's and Donovan's families filed wrongful death lawsuits against the men and the Hopkins County Jail, with the latter case being settled for an undisclosed amount in 2008. At the time of her disappearance, Burns, who lived at home with her parents and younger brother, was enrolled in Marshall's Community and Technical College, studying to become a physical therapy assistant. She also worked part-time at the J.C. Penney department store in Huntington Mall. While her case remains unsolved, foul play is strongly suspected due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Chandai Cochran was last seen in Sutton, West Virginia, on August 20th, 2019, when her mother left for work that day. Upon returning home later, her mother found that Cochran was gone, but all of her belongings, including personal items, were left behind. A handwritten note left by Cochran read, "Mom, I took off for a little while. I'm in good hands, I promise. Be back shortly. Please don't worry, no need to. Call if you need me. Love you, Chan." Authorities discovered that Cochran had been picked up from her mother's home that afternoon by a man named Christopher Spees, and they both traveled to the Birch River area of Nicholas County, possibly to sell drugs. They visited the home of a man named Sam Kelly, who reported seeing them leave around midnight. Kelly stated that he saw Spees and Cochran walking away from his residence on foot, heading in the direction of the local fire department. Cochran has never been heard from again, and her cell phone was turned off around midnight, the same time she was last seen. Just days after her disappearance, her changed purse, containing her identification, was discovered in the woods near Birch River. Spees was later arrested on unrelated charges of failure to register as a sexual offender, and a photo of him is included in the case summary. He is now in prison, but maintains his innocence regarding Cochran's disappearance, stating that he was under the influence of drugs at the time and does not remember the events clearly. Despite multiple interviews with authorities, he has not provided any valuable information to help solve the case. The circumstances surrounding Cochran's disappearance remain unclear, and despite efforts from law enforcement, her case remains unsolved. Tammy Daniel was last seen on June 2, 1987, when her parents dropped her off at her trailer home in Stanford, West Virginia, around 3 o'clock a.m. At the time, her husband of 18 months, Ronald Gene Daniel, was asleep inside, and the door was locked. Tammy's mother offered to knock on the windows to wake Gene up so that he could let Tammy inside, but Tammy declined, saying she would sleep in the tent in the front yard instead. Tammy's parents drove away, but after a short distance, her mother insisted they turn around and return to check on her daughter, Not wanting to leave her alone in the yard upon their return, they heard what sounded like a door closing. They looked around the yard and could not find Tammy, so they assumed Jean had woken up and let her inside. The couple left again and never saw their daughter again. The next day, when Tammy's parents returned to her home, she was still gone. Jean claimed that he had asked Tammy to leave, stating that he didn't know where she was. For days later, after no one had heard from Tammy, her parents reported her missing. On June 5th, 3 days after Tammy's disappearance, Jean borrowed a vacuum cleaner from a neighbor. When he returned it, it had a foul smell and a sticky substance on it. Police took the vacuum for testing, and it was determined to be stained with blood that matched Tammy's type. Upon searching the Daniel home, authorities found a stain on the bedroom carpet, as well as what appeared to be blood on the carpet padding and the floor underneath. Jean has always maintained his innocence in Tammy's disappearance, claiming he believed she left of her own accord. In January 1989, he was convicted of murdering another man in a July 1988 shooting. Jean admitted to the shooting, but claimed it was in self-defense during the trial. He served a prison sentence for the crime and has since been released. In the 1990s, Jean was indicted for Tammy's murder, but the case was dismissed due to a lack of evidence. Tammy has never been found, and foul play is suspected in her case due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. John Marino was last seen at Uncle Mike's Bar on 7th Street in Parkersburg, West Virginia, shortly before midnight on January 30th, 2019. He ordered a beer, drank half of it, and then got up to leave. An employee who saw him leave assumed he was simply going to the bathroom, but he never returned to finish his drink and has not been heard from since. At the time of his disappearance, he was carrying his wallet, car keys, and his iPhone X. Marino was driving his mother's silver 2015 Ford Escape that night. 4 days later, the car was found unlocked and abandoned at Love's truck stop in Conneaut, Ohio, near the Pennsylvania border, about a 3.5-hour drive from Parkersburg. The vehicle was parked across 2 spaces, and inside were a phone charger, an empty bag of chips, and some change in a cup holder, but there was no sign of Marino. The car had been there for 3 or 4 days before it was reported. Marino had divorced 5 months prior to his disappearance and was living with his mother. He left behind 2 children, one in college and the other in high school, and it was completely uncharacteristic of him to go long periods without speaking to them. There is no indication he had any legal troubles or planned to leave his life behind. In fact, he had purchased tickets to an upcoming basketball game and had plans to attend with his son. Tragically, less than a year after his disappearance, Marino's mother passed away. His family continues to hold out hope for answers regarding his case. The circumstances of his disappearance remain unclear. Brian Cook was last seen in Lincoln, West Virginia, on July 28, 2011. He was dropped off at the post office by a black male who had driven him to the area from Boone County, West Virginia. At the time, Cook was reportedly carrying around $16,000 in cash, which he had received as an inheritance from his father. He has not been heard from since. Cook, an ex-Marine and certified welder, left behind a young daughter. During the summer of 2011, 3 other people went missing in the same general area as Cook. 2 of them, Rachel Michelle Toller and Chester Stewart, have since been found deceased. Toller's dismembered remains were discovered scattered among the trees in Stewart's cemetery, and Stewart's body was discovered in a swimming pool behind an abandoned house, weighted down with cinder blocks. Cook and another person, Sherry Myers, remain missing. The 4 individuals were reportedly acquainted, and police suspect a connection between their cases. Investigators believe that the disappearances of Myers and Cook, as well as the murders of Toller and Stewart, could be drug-related. The cases remain unsolved, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding their disappearances continue to perplex authorities.